The book of Ecclesiastes, verse 10. Do not say, why were the old times better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. Christian Realistic Gamer. So this video is going to be about Magic the Gathering. And a Christian, like a Christian with some conservative perspective about it. Probably going to be somewhat neutral, but let's just get into it a little bit. Okay, so I have played this game a tremendous amount throughout my life. Now, I mean, I also talked about the League of Legends video. This might be a little bit similar at times, but okay. So I mean, obviously this is a fantasy game, but it's also kind of realistic in a lot of ways too. There's Bible verses on cards. There's all sorts of historical and realistic stuff. And then there also is obviously a lot of fantasy, and they have spell casting, and they also added in a whole bunch of like, what do you call it, like the multiverses, or like, look at this picture here, universes beyond. So it's a hogposh of like any and everything you could think of that could be remotely interesting to you. Statistically, it's probably in some way, shape, or form. So okay, so I haven't really played this game personally in at least a couple of years at this point. Really, ever since like, what do you call it, that? What do they call it? The COOF. You know what that is, like 4 years ago or about or so. I haven't really played this game too much since then. It is filled with there is a massive amount. I mean, the nicest way I could say it is probably is that it's just filled with nonsense. It's also extremely fun at the same time. So I've kind of on and off played this game for the past like 15 years, and it's definitely a lot of fun. But so like from a Christian point of view, so what are a handful of things I could talk about it for with? So I guess like whether a person should or shouldn't play this game. So I mean, okay, so my general point of view is that I don't hate fantasy per se. Like, I know that I probably come off to a lot of people that I'm very like I hate fantasy. I mean, if anything, I probably would argue that I have like this deep love for fantasy. It's just that especially the darkness within it is really the big problem. I believe in the idea of more separating, like there's like a neutral fantasy. It's like what I call like evil fantasy or like dark fantasy, separating the two. And then the more neutral fantasy is just like a genre, and then like the evil fantasy parts that are really dangerous. Because like some of the things I do like about fantasy, like I'm just scrolling through or whatever. Like, how they have like a dinosaur or something, and a dinosaur is like 100 feet tall or something, and it has like I think the word people call it a fantastical version of something. Like this kind of stuff, in my opinion, is really cool. Like different dinosaurs, and you got some kind of all sorts of different animals or beasts, or got some dragons or something, or wyvern. I mean, like, even again, I mean, I know that, like, again, like if it's one thing for there to be something like bad in the game, but I feel like for it to be the villain of the story is a lot different than say it being like something normal. Like, I know there's demons in here, but the demons are depicted as evil, and they're basically like the devil and the followers of hell, and you fight against the demons. So I mean, generally the 5 colors. Black is generally regarded as like morally evil. Obviously, it has nothing to do with the color of one's skin. It's just there are people who are the skin color black who are like white paladins. Like, not white. They are part of the color white, and they're like paladins. It's nothing to do with one's skin color, if anyone's thinking about that. It's just black in this game represents the devil. It represents evil. It's known as death, decay, and disease. Just all around bad. And white in this game basically represents God. It represents what is holy. It protects people. About life. It's about what's good. Because the Magic the Gathering, in a lot of ways, is actually based off of the Bible. In a lot of ways, and the people who originally made this game, they had they took realistic themes, and they took like the Bible, and they added a level of fantasy into it too. That's kind of how they made their game. I can't remember exactly when. Around the year, I think 2016. I think about. Though I'm sure I'll get fact check on that, but something like that is when the people who they took over the game of Magic the Gathering, and they decided that they were going to break the Magic the Gathering away from being a hogposh of all the different stuff to trying to make it into like a full-scale fantasy universe. And they took it away from reality or real stuff to making it to like full-scale fantasy. So like this game used to have lots of real-world references. Let's see if I can if I type in some stuff here. Like there's cards with Bible verses. Oh, there's also a card called Wrath of God. At the time, it was one of the most powerful cards. Here, I'll look up that one. It's basically, in a lot of ways, a direct reference to the Bible. I know they tried to twist it around. Let's see here. See what versions I can find. So, like, let's do the one on the left. That's basically just like some so-called god, Heliod or whatever. They wanted to make I guess like the old version. Let's look at this one. I think this is more of like so this is the more older version. It's probably lots of different artworks. Obviously, it's just humans created it or whatever. But the idea, I see how it says all creatures in play are buried or buried. This is probably in a lot of ways a reference to like stuff like Sodom and Gomorrah. How in the Bible there's a record that God like he used fire and brimstone. The idea that God burned them. God took all of these evil people and he buried them with was it like burning sulfur from heaven? And this card in a way represents well, you look at the name, Wrath of God. This is well, in holiness it directly references God from his story. So like this is just an example of this is the old stuff, and they wanted to remove all the biblical themes. They wanted to remove all of the Christianity. They wanted to remove all the realistic stuff. And then they tried to push all their their pagan crap to the maximum levels. They put this like see the one on the right, you see the one on the left. They tried, and they even like in the audacity, like I generally that in my opinion is just satanic. You try to remove from the Bible and then to convert that to something evil. That is just blasphemous. I can understand if it was never that way to begin with, but the idea that the idea of okay, let's take a look here, and then like I'm not trying. Well, I mean, I guess I will talk a little bit about the politics because I did say this is a little bit of a conservative perspective too. What's it called? I think it's called WOTC, or people call it WotC, or Wizards of the Coast. And they basically took over their company, and they had the same thing like around that time, 2015 and forward. All that whole all that woke stuff. The liberal people, they basically just took over entertainment, started shoving their garbage into everything, and they tried to remove everything that actually was valuable and the people cared about. They destroyed Star Wars. They destroyed Marvel. Destroyed Dungeons and Dragons. They destroyed Magic the Gathering. I mean, just imagine something that you think that you used to like or that people actually cared about, and these people just basically just pissed all over it and just humiliated everything you cared about. And that's what those people did. But I'm not going to get too deep into that. People hate them enough as it is. It's all good at this point. So let's just look here. So, look at some of these old cards. There's like a Bible verse in it. There's a lot of biblical themes. There's some historical things. Now, I personally don't agree with the idea of what's it called, like Islam or something. They have some Islamic references to their holy book. I don't need to be disrespectful or anything. What's called the Quran, but there's a lot of there's direct biblical cards, and there's a lot of themes that are biblical that aren't direct necessarily. Let's see here. Before honor is humility. The book of Proverbs. They have and the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently. From one of the Gospels of Christ, the book of Mark. They have what's it called, the sea serpent or the Leviathan from the book of Job. Leviathan 2. Can you catch him with a fish hook or run a line round his tongue? And I'm sure there's at least 10 different direct Bible verses, and they also have some of these. I don't think this is a real card. They have a bunch of fan-made versions and cards and stuff too. I also think that stuff is really cool. There's a bunch of Christians who made fan art, or maybe it wasn't a Christian who made fan art. Still, I mean, look at some of this stuff. This is pretty cool in my opinion. But they also have some naughty versions of more realistic representations I'm probably not going to mention. But you could look at some of the older cards. You can see that there are some. Let's see, what did I'm pretty sure that's a fan-made card, but still, this stuff is cool. It shows the 5 different colors. And then not all the colors are necessarily evil. Like black generally represents just darkness, but it's also debatable whether in a story whether darkness can be used as a storytelling. Here's a card. It's hard to find a version of this one that's even legible. I think even this on here, it's not even easy to see. Really old card. It's called Revelation. I don't think I can even read this one. Let's see here. I know it's from the book of Ecclesiastes. Yeah, I can barely read it. They also have stuff like angels and stuff. And there's other, like Swords of Plowshare. Plowshares. So it's you take somebody who's a really strong fighting warrior, and you're just you exile them to go work in a field for the rest of their lives or something. Part water. Knowing from the book of Exodus with the artwork is questionable. Maybe that's Moses. But there was when God parted I think it's called the Red Seas, or again, maybe I just can't even remember exactly what happened, what the name was called. But he parted the seas, and the people of Israel were able to walk through it, and it's like a biblical reference. So you can see there are a lot of them out there. I mean, I can't even remember. I don't even know what half of them are. But you can they added all their satanic garbage too. But Oh yeah, and there also was, yeah, I think, yeah, remembering all the evil people. They also had like demon sacrifices and stuff too. I mean, that stuff is bad in real life, but again, I mean, it exists. Bad stuff is bad, but you call it what it is. But yeah, so there was a lot of biblical themes, and they decided they were going to just make their own world. Now it's kind of subjective in a lot of ways. Maybe in some sense it's possibly a good thing. I know a lot of people have different points of view in this kind of stuff. That at least at the end of the day, if they change the world to make it just a full fantasy game, at least it doesn't like taint. Well, it doesn't taint like in holiness God's name and like the Christian faith and stuff, because it strips away its old identity and it has this other one. So it's highly subjective at the same time, because like, it prevents a lot of disrespect and a lot of like just staining the faith and religious aspects. Kind of like with the Nintendo, the whole thing that I think Nintendo did, or the old video games did. Nintendo just said no real world religions and no real world aspects in their games whatsoever. Again, a very subjective and morally gray theme. But the value you can get out of that is at least it prevents the like the tainting and the staining and the disrespect directly upon God and the church and heaven and all the things that are truly righteous. It sort of separates them, so it creates the world to be more of like a fantasy world. Again, like the one that's another positive of fantasy in some sense. For all the bad things about most fantasy, at least it separates and keeps them different. It in a very like conservative sense, it it protects the things that are more righteous and holy, and it puts all their nonsense on display higher. It keeps the things that are actually valuable and sacred kind of like protected and secure. For all their arrogance and for all the evils these people do, at least in some sense, there's that good. But yeah, so you can it's a cool, you can play, you're gonna have a community. I know there's lots of Christians who play this game too. I wouldn't exactly say this is a Christian friendly game necessarily, but there's a community. I know the name of the game is just really evil, and that turns a lot of people off. And the idea of magic, the name's called magic, and lots of sorcery and stuff, and almost everything is linked to sorcery. But I also think you gotta like here it says the sorcery speed. Some of that stuff I feel like it's kind of just like a legal mechanic or something. You gotta be willing to in your mind separate one from the other. It's just a statistic, and it's just a number. The name is demonic, but it's just a card game. You gotta kind of separate one from the other to a neutral line and put one on one side and one on the other. It's like game mechanic on one side and a demonic name on the other, and kind of break them apart. And in your mind, you gotta accept the fact that it's just a game mechanic for the speed of how you play the card. But it's also why it's also kind of gray too, because it has some pretty naughty names. Like the name of the game is kind of naughty. How they call all the cards spells. They have a spell speed. They have lots of different naughty stuff in it. How you gather mana or resources from tapping a land to give you some magic power. A lot of that stuff. And even in fantasy, you kind of have to break them apart. It's like a neutral mechanic. I'm not saying that justifies and rationalizes it necessarily, but also in the game how there's biblical cards and stuff too, right? So there's things that are righteous in this world, and there's there's open demonic themes too. There's paganism and blasphemies and all sorts of nasty stuff too. All sorts of extreme liberal, all sorts of extreme liberal crap too. Like how they got to push all this crap in it all the time. I mean, despite all the other problems it probably has too. So yeah, like, I mean, if you play the game, I probably recommend avoiding the color black too much. I mean, I guess you could try to, I mean, again, you can try to, and also playing this kind of game, you can try to justify and rationalize it. The same thing with fantasy, but, you know, there's so much garbage in it. So the other thing is, there really isn't that many other trading card games that are like this good either. I mean, would I recommend playing this game? I don't know. I probably have a neutral disposition towards it, frankly. You know, there's a lot of good and righteous and realistic and biblical themes in it, and it's just like a mountain of paganism trash in it at the same time. And the people who own the game, who make the choices, are basically like possessed by like the devil. I mean, that's just how evil they are. I feel like that's probably me being generous, frankly. Saying that somebody's like the devil, these people are arguably even like worse than the devil. They're really bad people. And I mean, I'm pretty sure they own both Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, and they like to do lots of mixes and matches. I might make a video about Dungeons and Dragons at some point too. But you know, you gotta be careful. There's, you know, like I like in fantasy, I like stuff like, you know, different, like, you know, different races of different like humanoid stuff and different like fantastical versions of certain things. A lot of the stuff I think is cool, but that's like a more neutral point of view. And there's lots of righteous things, but also what you get with a lot of fantasy is you get lots of like, you know, demonic pagan themes. And they have to shove as much as that as possible. They have to push all of the boundaries and limits to the maximum level all the time. Like they can never. It's just never good enough. Always got to push something nasty in it all the time. And there's never a time when it's not. You can't just have like a fantasy world. You got to put as much evil as possible in it. You got to make it as perverse and unholy and gross and, you know, abominations and twisted anti-biblical themes. You got to push all of the lines and the limits to the maximum possible. And that's just what these people do. If you're not careful as a Christian, you know, you're going to get sucked into it. And they have all these so-called quote-unquote deities. It's just like, you know, your mind just spins with nonsense and you get addicted to it, and it's a lot of fun. But again, that's also why on my channel I try to not make walkthroughs of a lot of this stuff. I mean, I do like a lot of this stuff, but just because I like it doesn't mean that I should or that's good for me. I think in the New Testament it talks about you know, everything is legal for me, but not everything is beneficial. And I mean, could you justify, you know, playing some, you know, fantasy game or whatever? Yes. But should you? Well, maybe not. Maybe you could, or maybe you couldn't. Yeah, it's legal, sure. There's a lot of things that are illegal in your life that you could try to do. I mean, you know, it's not good for you, or maybe it's really, really bad for you. Like, you know, playing like one of these MMOs or something. You can put like 1,000 hours into it, and yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. You know, it's also like really pagan. They have all these Greek, you know, quote unquote gods or whatever. I mean, like the amount of nonsense in it. You gotta like. And then I would give this advice as like a Christian. You know, before you play the game, you know, go in with the mindset of, you know, kind of like discerning like, you know, truth and reality from fantasy. And like ask God or pray to God, have Him to help you with it. And also, when you're done with the game or whatever, when you get some free time or whatever, when you're driving on your way home, you know, obviously be safe when you're driving or whatever, but, you know, like just ask God, like try to like, you know, pray to God or try to find a way to, like, purify your mind and try to keep your mind a little bit more sane and clear. That's also why I would argue exercising a level of discretion, also just a level of, like, moderation and self-control. I mean, if you again, like, you could play this game, but maybe, you don't have to play this, you don't have to do fantasy, like, every second of the day. And some of this stuff, again, like, is it fun? Yeah. Does it feel good? Yeah. But it's also, like, giving into some, like, your pagan, sinful flesh. And it's not really very righteous either. It gives you a level of escapism, but, there's a lot of darkness in it. And just, even if it's not technically wrong, it doesn't mean it's not gray. It's very morally gray. And it fills your mind, and you sow all these seeds of, like, I don't know, just, like, nonsense. Just massive amounts of, like, chaos and madness and nonsense, and fills your head with a bunch of mythological literature-y things, and it really isn't very good for you. So, like, I mean, you should, try to have some self-control. Like, how much you're spending on this stuff, how much money you're spending, how much time you spend on it, all the stuff you're doing with it. Again, maybe try to avoid, like, maybe you can just avoid their pantheon if possible, or avoid have certain rules for certain things you accept or don't accept. Maybe try to avoid, like, the excessive amounts of sorcery in the series or something, and have some control over yourself. And also remember God. Fantasy isn't really real. And I feel like in life there's like, on one side there's reality, and the other side there's fantasy. But, like, above fantasy and above reality there's truth. There's in holiness there's God's kingdom, the Father, Son, and Spirit, the one God in three persons. Truth supersedes reality, and truth supersedes fantasy. And remember God, despite anything. I mean, if you play in a fantasy game, remember God and acknowledge Him. I mean, it's questionable whether you should really be in there to begin with, but just try to minimize the garbage you do, and try to find ways to be more neutral. Try to find ways to be more righteous. Find ways to glorify God. Keep your crap together. Or even better, if you really feel like you can't deal with it, maybe just don't do it. Or otherwise, you could another thing you can do is you can just take a break from it too. Taking a break, it's like, even the idea of like a spiritual fast of something like this, or an MMO or whatever it is. You maybe take a break for 3 to 6 months from it or something, and, like, you detox your mind from a lot of this stuff, and it makes it easier to help you to keep your crap together, and a sense of, like, purity and holiness within your life, some like temperance or self-control. All right, well, thanks for listening. God is good.